So in today's numeracy lesson, we're going to do a little bit of a recap on perimeter and start some work on area. So perimeter you've met before, and you should therefore be aware that the perimeter of a shape is the total distance around the outside of a shape. So if you're asked to find the perimeter of a shape, it basically means that you are going to add up all the outside lengths. So for example, if you had a rectangle like this and you were given two measurements on that rectangle, you could add all four sides up. So you could write a sum where you had 2.3, 2.3, so because remember opposite sides are equal, that would get you 19.4, and then you would state, so perimeter is 19.4, or your working could look like this. You could simply add the 2.3 and the 7.4, get 9.7, but know that that is not your answer, because you then need to double it to get to the 19.4. So I'm sure you've met that before. That's for rectangles. All you're basically doing is adding up your length. But what we want to think about next is, what do we mean by area? And we know that length is measured in metric units, millimeters being the smallest, centimeters, your meters, and then on to kilometers. So what about area? What do we think about in terms of area, and how do we actually measure it? And basically the area of a shape is the measure of the two-dimensional space. So that's the space that is actually inside the shape, not the outside. Perimeter's the outside, area is the space inside. And we use square units to measure this. Imagine trying to cover the space in squares. So the amount of space inside a little square, probably in your jotter, that measures 1 centimetre by 1 centimetre is 1 square centimetre, and it's written like this, cm with a little 2. Other units of area that we might use, if it was a very, very tiny area that we were calculating, like the end of a pencil, it might be measured in square millimetres. For a much larger room, like in the floor of your house, buying new carpet and things like that, we usually buy that in square metres. And larger again, like farmers, and even in the country, we would talk about the size of a country in square kilometres. So those are much bigger units as we would go up. There's some other units that we can use, and those are things called hectares and acres. So farmers and people like that would usually talk about hectares. 1 hectare is 10,000 square metres, so a fairly large area. Area of a football pitch is usually measured in hectares, and acres are what land and property is traditionally measured in. So farmers would talk about having so many acres, and there's what an equivalence is. An acre is 4,046.86 square metres. You don't have to know those conversions, but it's just mention it to you in passing. So basically with areas, if you can see the squares in front of you, so this particular shape here, right, nice and easy, you can see that there are 7 squares there in that shape. So what you'd write down is the area would be 7 square centimetres. Right, this one here, right, we can sort of count. We've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 squares that are filling up that shape. So we would say its area is 16 square centimetres. For this one here, you've got a couple of little half pieces. So this would be 1, right, 2, 3, 4, your half here, your half here. So that would give you a total of 5 square centimetres. So for shapes where you can easily see the squares that are covering the inside, it's quite quick and quite easy. However, if you've got no squares there, what do you do? So this here, right, we can clearly see on the left, no squares inside it, but if we did put squares inside it, it would look like that. So two rows of centimetre squares by 4 columns. So hopefully you can see that simply by counting the squares in there or by multiplying, we can quickly work out that the area of this particular rectangle would be 8 square centimetres. So what that takes us to is, although we don't always have the squares, this leads us into the fact that we can work out in general the area of a rectangle simply by multiplying the length times by the breadth. Okay, and that is just simply for any rectangle, length and breadth. And of course in a square, length and breadth are equal, but you would still multiply them together. So this little formula, area equals length times breadth, is what we will be using to work out the area of rectangles from now on. We won't be counting squares, we'll be doing this. And so these two here, you'll see this says known calculator. So looking for you to, if you're asked to work out the area, and the important bit is how we write down the working. So what I'd ask you to do is maybe copy these into your jotter. You might want to pause this as we go along so you've got time to copy it. So area is equal to length times breadth. So you've just seen that. In this case, that would mean you'd write underneath area equals 5 times 13. And then from that, that would mean you would do get the answer of 65. If you're unable to work that out in your head, what I suggest you do is at the side you could do your working like that. 5 times 3 is 15, 5 ones 5 and 1 is 65. But it's writing out your working in this particular way where we've got the formula written down. So again, the second one, right, it's the same thing, area equals length times breadth. However, thing to notice here is the one on the left, the measurements were all about centimetres. The one on the right, this is like a room that measures maybe 4 metres by 6 metres. So the area units this time are not square centimetres, but they are square metres. So the M with a little 2. And that would be what we'd be looking for. I know you can do 6 times 4 in your head, so that's why you'd write it down. But the 3 lines of working are what I would be looking for. So make sure you've maybe paused the video and copied those 2 examples and see how to write down your working. So just in summary, what we'd be looking for you to do is to show your working in the following way. So if you're asked to work out the area, you begin by saying I'm working out the area using the formula length times breadth. In this particular instance, my length and breadth are 7 times 4.6. It doesn't matter whether you wrote 4.6 times 7 or 7 times 4.6, but the working that you need to do would be done at the side here, 4.6, right, times by 7, and we'd be looking for, you get the answer of 32.2. This time, right, the units that we're looking for are the square meters again, because that was all in meters, but sometimes it'll be square centimeters. If you're asked to do the perimeter and the exercise you're going to work on asks you to do the perimeter, we would be looking for you to do a sum. So because you're going to be adding up all of those, and again you can do it the quick way is just add up the 2 numbers that you've got there. So the 7, the 4.6, you would get 11.6. I would then be looking for you to know that you need to double that because you've got 4 sides and we've only added 2. So times them by 2 would get us to 23.2, and then you would write down perimeter equals 23.2. Now do not use square meters with a perimeter, it's just meters. Okay, so the perimeter bit you've met before, and that's what I want to see for your working. I want to see the units are used there. For the area formula, you may or may not have met that before, but we need you to write out your working in that way.